Something is happening right now in the Persian Gulf that almost no major network has fully mapped out, and if you understand what it actually means, you will never look at Middle Eastern power the same way again. This is not a story about missiles or naval fleets, not on the surface. On the surface, yes, there are warships. There are underground bunkers thrown open to the sky. There are fighter jets burning fuel on runway standby. But beneath all of that is something far more structurally dangerous. A quiet, calculated repositioning of power that has taken place over the course of just a few weeks, and it has cornered one of the most heavily armed regimes on the planet in a trap it cannot escape cleanly. Welcome to Nexa World Brief, where we do not simply report events. We trace the architecture underneath them. And today that architecture is telling a story that most people are not yet equipped to read. Let us begin where almost nobody is beginning, which is not the strait, not the warships, not even the missile silos. Let us begin with a single question that geopolitical planners in Tehran are almost certainly asking themselves at this very moment. How did we end up needing the same country that is now pointing guns at our closest targets? Because that is the real story. That is the hidden fracture running underneath every headline you are seeing right now. Iran, one of the most strategically active states in the region, with decades of experience in asymmetric pressure and regional leverage, has found itself in a position that its own doctrine never fully anticipated. It is economically dependent on a neighbor that has simultaneously become the military backbone of its primary adversary. That is not just irony. That is a structural trap, and it was not built overnight. To understand the full weight of what is happening, you need to understand what May 2026 actually represents in regional terms. The Strait of Hormuz, that narrow corridor of water through which roughly 20% of the world's traded oil passes every single day, has effectively become a contested zone. American naval assets have been deployed with a force and visibility not seen in years, creating what amounts to a maritime choke point layered over an already geographic choke point. The pressure on Tehran is not merely symbolic. It is existential in economic terms. Sanctions have been a constant for decades, but a physical naval presence of this magnitude transforms a financial squeeze into something closer to a siege. The regime cannot easily project its oil wealth outward. Its connections to international markets are fraying. And in that context, the land routes to its east have become something very close to a lifeline. Now here is where the story becomes genuinely extraordinary, because while that naval pressure was building in the west, something equally significant was taking shape in the east, though almost nobody was framing it in those terms. Pakistan, which shares a long and historically complicated border with Iran, quietly opened 6 overland transport corridors in late April of 2026. Thousands of containers, fuel shipments, commercial cargo moving daily through Gwadar and Karachi, bypassing the locked maritime routes entirely. For Tehran, this was not a diplomatic gesture. It was oxygen. It was the difference between a regime that can keep its economy breathing and one that cannot. And Pakistan knew exactly what it was doing when it opened those routes. It was not naivety. It was not charity. It was positioning. Because at almost the same moment those corridors were opened, Pakistan's foreign minister delivered one of the most direct and consequential public statements made by any government in the region in recent memory. Saudi Arabia, he said, is a red line. Any action that threatens the kingdom or its sacred geography will be met with an immediate and decisive military response. Strip away the diplomatic vocabulary, and what you are left with is a declaration. A nuclear-armed state with one of the largest standing armies in Asia has drawn a line in the sand around Riyadh. And it has backed that declaration not with words alone, but with steel and personnel. Since April 2026, over 13,000 Pakistani combat troops have moved into Saudi territory. Not advisors, not training personnel, heavy infantry, armored units, artillery, air defense systems, and critically, multiple squadrons of advanced fighter aircraft positioned at bases in the kingdom's eastern provinces, roughly 400 kilometers from the Iranian coastline. Think carefully about what 400 kilometers means in modern combat aviation. It means that Pakistani jets sitting on Saudi runways can reach targets inside Iranian territory in under 15 minutes. 15 minutes. In geopolitical terms, that is not a distance. That is a pressure point held permanently at the throat. The pilots are not waiting for orders to arrive through bureaucratic channels. They are on rotating alert cycles around the clock, engines capable of being live within minutes of an escalation signal. This is not a deterrent posture built for show. It is a deterrent posture built for use. And the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which has spent decades operating in the gray zones of asymmetric warfare, is now looking at a conventional military reality that its playbook was not designed to handle. Before a regime collapses, before a strategy breaks apart, the most dangerous phase is always the moment just before it admits that its assumptions were wrong. And that is precisely the phase we appear to be in right now. Iran built its regional doctrine on several foundational assumptions: that it could absorb economic pressure through asymmetric countermoves, that it could project deterrence through proxies and missile arsenals, that no single regional power would have both the will and the capacity to directly challenge it on the ground. Each of those assumptions is now under simultaneous pressure. The American naval presence challenges the first. The integrated Saudi and Gulf air defense networks challenge the second. And Pakistan's deployment challenges the third in a way that is almost without historical precedent in this region. What Pakistan has achieved here is something that deserves to be studied independently of the immediate crisis, because it represents a level of strategic sophistication that most coverage is completely undervaluing. Islamabad has constructed what might be the most elegant geopolitical leverage structure in recent regional history. It has made itself indispensable to Tehran economically, while simultaneously making itself the decisive military variable in any scenario where Tehran chooses aggression. It has weaponized interdependence. The trade corridors are not just humanitarian corridors or commercial routes. They are a leash that Iran is holding in one hand while Pakistan holds the other end. And if Iran moves toward Riyadh, Pakistan does not just pull the leash, it cuts it entirely, which means Tehran would lose its only remaining functional economic artery at precisely the moment it needs resources most, because it would simultaneously be fighting on two fronts. And the military mathematics of that two-front scenario are brutal. To the west, American carrier strike groups, electronic warfare capabilities, and air assets that can dominate the strait and strike inland. To the east, Pakistani forces with a nuclear deterrent structure behind them, advanced radar systems, precision munitions, and fighter jets already forward-positioned inside the target zone. Iran's underground missile infrastructure, which has been one of its primary strategic assets for years, was built under the assumption of a manageable threat environment. In a two-front scenario, those hardened facilities become high-priority targets for coordinated strikes from multiple vectors simultaneously. The IRGC's tactical doctrine of drone swarms and fast boat harassment works against isolated naval assets. It does not work against integrated air defense networks backed by fourth-generation fighters and satellite coordination. Geography itself is being reshaped as a weapon. That is not a metaphor. The physical corridors through which Iran breathes economically now run through a country that has aligned its military posture against any Iranian aggression in the Gulf. Saudi Arabia's eastern provinces, once the most exposed flank of the kingdom, have effectively become a forward operating platform for a Pakistani expeditionary force. The map has changed, not symbolically but structurally. And maps that change structurally tend to stay changed. The infrastructure underpinning this shift, the airfields, the supply chains, the command and communications integration between Pakistani and Saudi forces, does not disassemble easily or quickly. Even if the immediate crisis de-escalated tomorrow, the strategic architecture being built right now would persist. The global consequences of this realignment extend well beyond the Persian Gulf. China, which has invested enormously in the China-Pakistan economic corridor and views Gwadar as a cornerstone of its Indian Ocean strategy, is watching the situation with unusual intensity. A deeper Pakistan-Saudi security partnership changes the geometry of influence in a region where Beijing has been carefully cultivating relationships for years. If Pakistan becomes the primary external security guarantor for the Gulf monarchies, that is leverage China cannot easily replicate or neutralize. Russia, which has relied on Iran as a regional pressure valve and a counter to Western influence, faces the prospect of its most important Middle Eastern partner being strategically cornered in a way that limits its utility as a partner at all. A Tehran locked into a defensive posture is not Tehran projecting the kind of regional disruption that Moscow finds useful. European energy planners, still navigating the structural shocks of the past several years, are running scenarios about what a Gulf conflict would do to already strained LNG supply chains. The answer is nothing comfortable. There is also a dimension of this story that almost no one is discussing openly, which is the domestic political reality inside Iran that makes this situation even more volatile rather than less. The Iranian regime does not operate with the flexibility of a government that can simply recalibrate in public. Its legitimacy, particularly among its core hardline constituencies, rests on a narrative of resistance and strategic capability. Backing down visibly, especially in response to what would be perceived as encirclement by a Sunni-majority Pakistan defending a Sunni monarchy, carries its own catastrophic internal political risks. The IRGC does not answer to a parliament. It answers to a revolutionary ideology and to a senior leadership structure that is itself under pressure from multiple directions. This means that the rational strategic exit, the one where Tehran quietly reduces tensions, accepts some economic concessions, and preserves its military capabilities for another day, is not as accessible as it might appear from the outside. The regime may be trapped not only by Pakistan's leverage, but by its own internal political architecture. And that combination is what makes the next 72 hours genuinely unpredictable. Saudi Arabia, for its part, is absorbing this moment with the awareness that it represents something historically significant. For much of the past decade, Riyadh operated in the shadow of an Iranian threat it could not neutralize unilaterally, dependent on American security guarantees that were themselves subject to political fluctuation in Washington. What Pakistan's intervention has done is diversify that security guarantee in a way that makes it structurally more resilient. The kingdom is no longer a single-point security client. It now has multiple layers of external military commitment, each with its own escalation logic and deterrence calculus. That is a permanent shift in the Gulf's power balance, and it will shape the defense postures of every state in the region regardless of how the immediate crisis resolves. The silent war of systems and logistics is now more decisive than any single military exchange could be. What is being decided right now is not which side fires the first missile. What is being decided is which strategic architecture survives into the next decade. Iran's model, proxies, asymmetric pressure, energy leverage, and patient attrition is colliding with a counter-model that uses economic dependency, conventional military positioning, and nuclear deterrence simultaneously. One of these frameworks will emerge structurally dominant from this period, and that outcome will define the region's power map for a generation. The stakes are not measured in individual missile strikes or naval confrontations. They are measured in whether the 30-year experiment in Iranian regional primacy survives contact with this new alignment. What happens next is genuinely uncertain, and that uncertainty is not a journalistic hedge. It is the honest condition of a situation where multiple decision-making bodies, each with their own internal pressures, ideological constraints, and risk tolerances, are making calculations in real time with incomplete information about each other's actual red lines. Iran may calculate that Pakistan's commitments are performative and will dissolve under actual pressure. Pakistan may be testing whether its deterrent posture is credible enough to hold without being activated. Saudi Arabia may be watching to see whether this new security framework actually functions before committing to a deeper long-term structure. The United States is managing an escalation ladder of its own with multiple rungs still available. And every one of these actors knows that a single miscalculation, a weapon system activated too early, a communication misread, a political statement taken as a military signal, could trigger a cascade that none of them is positioned to stop cleanly. This is what genuine strategic danger looks like. Not a villain and a victim, not a clear aggressor and a clear defender. A system under pressure with multiple actors holding enormous destructive capability, each calculating that the other will blink first, with no guarantee that the math holds. Infrastructure is now more powerful than any single military force in this theater. The corridors, the airfields, the defense networks, the supply chains, these are the real terrain of the conflict unfolding right now. And whoever controls the infrastructure of survival in this region will control its future. So here is the question I want to leave with you because it is the one that matters most heading into the coming days. If Tehran has genuinely been cornered, economically dependent on a country that is militarily aligned against any aggressive move it might make, does that make escalation less likely because the costs are too high? Or more likely because a regime that cannot escape through strategy may feel that confrontation is the only way to break the trap? History does not always favor the rational exit. Sometimes it favors the desperate one. Drop your answer in the comments. Tell me what you think Iran does next and why. This is Nexa World Brief. Stay close to this one. It is moving fast, and the next development could change everything we just laid out. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because in a situation this fluid, the story you missed today is the one that explains everything tomorrow.